Viewing or listening to this podcast confirms acceptance of the disclaimer visible on your screen or found at authorscott.com/podcast. Welcome to the Regaining Health and Humanity podcast. I'm Dr. Scott Johnson, your guide on this journey to natural well-being. Here we explore evidence-based insights, revolutionary breakthroughs, and powerful health strategies that not only inform, but inspire change. Together, we'll uncover the mysteries of human existence and unlock the secrets to thriving. This podcast is more than just knowledge. It's your catalyst for unleashing extraordinary potential. Get ready. Your journey to boundless health and happiness starts now. Hello, friends, and welcome to the Regaining Health and Humanity podcast. I hope you found previous episodes helpful in improving your life. I'm your host, Dr. Scott Johnson, and today we're going to explore the fascinating world of genetic biohacking. The concept of epigenetics has exploded over the past 15 to 20 years because of major discoveries linking epigenetics to human health, such as the impact of early life experiences on long-term health outcomes. To dive into how we can hack our genes to improve our well-being and health span, I've invited Dr. Sharad Paul to the show. Dr. Paul is a skin cancer specialist, family physician, evolutionary biologist, storyteller, social entrepreneur, and an adjunct professor at Auckland University of Technology. Born in England with a childhood in India, he's a global citizen and a noted polymath. He received an International Excellence Award for leading health improvements on a global scale and has worked towards patient-centered medicine across several countries. He has authored works of fiction, nonfiction, poetry, and medical textbooks. His new book is Biohacking Your Genes, 25 Laws for a Smarter, Healthier, and Longer Life. Welcome, Dr. Paul.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure having you on the show. As we were just chatting before I started the recording, I think this is going to be an interesting topic, and it's something that I think people are trying to figure out how they can improve DNA methylation and their epigenetics. So I'm excited to have the conversation with you. I think that first we should start by talking about how your genes actually serve as a blueprint for your health, and why do they not fully determine our destiny?
Yes. So firstly, that's one of my favorite quotes is genes are a blueprint, but they're not our destiny. Mm-hmm. And I think really because if you look at health, as you know, any health condition or anything in life, really psychological thing, there's 50% nature and 50% nurture, right? So we inherit some genes from our parents, and the other 50% is what we do with our lifestyle. Now, what really got me interested in this was also because when I work with skin cancer, like you said, and when we're dealing with any tumors, first thing we do is we test the gene types so that we know if a patient is suitable for particular medications, especially in advanced cases. But we don't do this for wellness, for day-to-day stuff. Mm-hmm. So I guess from what you were talking about, biohacking, I tend to be at the more, holistic, conservative end where it's more diet and lifestyle and actions which we can take to improve our genes perform better. And genes are just protein makers. So if you think about Richard Dawkins' book, The Selfish Gene, over time, genes evolve for a population, not for the individual, right? So all us humans carry very similar genes, and your genes aren't loyal to Scott, like they're specifically loyal to humanity. And same with me. So if I did things, genes are just fundamentally protein makers, and proteins are involved in everything. We've all heard of amino acids and peptides and various things, and they do various things to our bodies. And if we do wrong actions for our gene types, then of course it will lead to adverse outcomes. And that's what my book is about, is how you can follow certain diets to reduce dementia, how you can optimize your performance in sports or athletics, how you can actually, do things which can increase your health span, which means perform to your best potential, so on and so forth, and thereby also increase your lifespan a little bit. Mm-hmm. Some people are more focused at the lifespan end, and that is in me. My thing is, look, while we're here now, let's be the best we can be. So that's my
Right.
philosophy.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because I think that there is a mindset shift that's occurring right now where people are more focused on your health span. Because if we're going to live a long time, we want those years to be as good as possible for as long as possible. We don't want to have the last several years of our life with several limitations and not being able to have a high quality of life. So, health span is so important. And it really comes down to our lifestyle because you're generally a reflection of your lifestyle. And so I'm glad that your book is focusing on nutrition and some other lifestyle factors because those are our foundational things that we need to focus on.
Absolutely. And one thing is that what I've realized in time of dealing with lots of patients is that, see, even those people whom we call super agers, like, the people who are living past 100, it's not that they don't get the same cardiovascular or metabolic or even cancerous changes. It's just that they get them later.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So with time, our reproductive mechanism of our DNA cell division does break down and we end up with lots of these things. But if you're a super ager, you can develop it later. And literally, this book is about health span and how you can also become a super ager because everything is within our control 50% of the time.
Right. Can you explain what biohacking genes means and how it can influence our health outcomes?
Yeah, so biohacking is broadly defined. So obviously, it just means, like you said, epigenetics. We are taking actions which can modify our gene expression and therefore leads to favorable outcomes. So that's literally what biohacking is.
Mm-hmm.
Now, on one hand, there is the end which I'm talking about, which is where we know, for example, the mind diet can reduce your risk of Alzheimer's by like 50%. So either without a family history of dementia, you can take actions, we can really reduce your risk. On the other hand, there are other methods where people actually take medications, say, like mTOR inhibitors to try and live a little bit longer. I must say, I'm a little bit skeptical on that, particularly because with that end, I was actually involved with some of those medications purely because some of them actually used to treat tumors and things like that. In fact, the mTOR, I looked at rapamycin because we use it for angiofibromas on the face. And so I had good knowledge of it. So they do have a lot of side effects. They're proven in worms and creatures, but what we've realized over time is we are not worms, so a lot of those things don't translate. And I think even people who famously have been trying them out and documenting them recently gave up on the mTOR. So I think there is a danger in trying to go editing your genes or CRISPR and things simply because, for the simple reason that our genes didn't evolve for us. So I think there is a great danger that we don't really know what we're doing at that end. And maybe in 10 years, we may have some much better evidence. But for now, there is plenty of evidence, like, even just as simple things like folic acid in women is proven to increase lifespan. We know that metformin, which is a diabetic medication, can do. So, you can do a little bit of interventional stuff if you're so interested. But my focus is that lifestyle and also optimizing your mind as well.
I think that your approach will provide more favorable outcomes. Diet and lifestyle are so important. And even the mental part that you're talking about. A lot of people don't put enough emphasis and focus on their mind. And we need to put some more emphasis on maintaining that sharpness throughout life. But what are some of the common misconceptions that maybe people have about genetics and the role of genetics in health?
I think the biggest thing is that you are doomed. Like, people tend to be negative about a family history, right? I think you just have to understand that everything, like I said earlier, is roughly 50-50 nature and nurture. So I think you always do have a chance that, you can make a difference and you can actually make a significant difference. So the thing which really astounded me when I was studying this or researching for it is how much of a difference we can make. Like, I'll give you one example which really stood out when I was researching for this book. On the chapter where I'm talking about vitamin D and where I'm talking about increase of autism spectrum disorders, which have gone up 600% in the last 20, 30 years with urbanization, people not spending enough time outdoors with, and for example, in those people, just in female diet in the second trimester, for example, if you increase your omega-3 intake in your second trimester, particularly for the trimester, you actually reduce your risk of having a child with an autism spectrum by up to 40%. That's massive. Like it's huge. And same with, like, my dad has dementia, and so I had a particular interest in the chapter on the mind diet. A lot of biohazard studies show that your risk actually halves if you can follow this. So I think everything needs a little bit of discipline, and the problem with us is, as humans, we're looking for quick fixes, right? And that's partly because medicine works on an illness model, right? You get ill, you go to your doctor, and a doctor gives you a pill, and you take something, or you need a procedure. So it's very interventional. So we're used to just taking something without even thinking too much about it and not taking enough responsibility. And one of the things I've said in a previous book, The Genetics of Health, is that, just like law doesn't always translate into justice, medicine isn't always health unless you take personal responsibility, right? And I think we don't take enough of that. So what I've found is that I was seeing a patient just a few days ago, and I was asking them, what medications are you on? Because I was prior to surgery, and they were like, oh, this blue pill, this pink pill. And I'm like, look, I'm not a pharmacist. What is it for? And they're like, I don't know. My doctor gave it to me. And I said to them, look, I'm amazed that you're educated, but you're putting something in your body, chemical, just somebody gave it to you, and you don't even know what that is.
Yeah.
So I do find it funny that we just sometimes are not conscious of what we're putting in our bodies. But the second thing, I think we've also lost intuition. We often don't know what's good for us. Like, you give junk food to an animal, won't often eat it. But for us, anything which tastes good, we're like, we're in, I think.
In my very first episode of my podcast, I talked about this, that we, in modern society, we're waiting for some sort of pill to rescue us from our lifestyle. That's basically the essence of what I said. Is we expect to eat whatever we want, not exercise, not manage our stress, not sleep well, all of these things that are lifestyle behaviors. And then we'll find something in a bottle that's going to make us feel better. And we need to get past that and shift our mindset, focusing on those foundational lifestyle things like you're mentioning. Can you share some practical examples of biohacks that individuals can implement to optimize their genetic potential?
All right. So the first thing, we were just talking about the diet for dementia, and that's one of my favorite ones. So I guess the key thing in that is, I've just given in the book, there's like A, B, C, D kind of rules for everything. And I think one of the things for that would be, avoiding red meat. And so the key thing is, if you really love your steak, then you should restrict it to once a week or something. So the book isn't prescriptive in the sense that it's not like hard and fast rules or make it so difficult for people to follow, but it's more realistic so you can actually comply with it. So we do know that if you eat red meat every day, you increase your risk of Alzheimer's as you get older. What we know is really good for you is berries, especially blueberries, and they're like phenomenally good for you. Plenty of studies show you just have 1.5 cups of blueberries. Within 2 hours, your tests improve. So we do know that blueberries are very good. All berries are good, but particularly blueberries. So that would be, and the C would be, chicken. We all heard about chicken soup for the soul. It actually tends to help the mind as well. Chicken broth studies have shown that it helps. And then the D is dairy, and avoiding dairy. I think it goes back to, if you think about like what you said earlier, human beings evolved organically. We were hunter-gatherers, we moved around. Things like processed food or even dairy came in very recently, right? So before that, it was not normal for a human being to drink the milk of another animal. So again, if you love your cheese and stuff like that, you can still have one day a week as your cheese day, and that's fine. And then the E would be everything green, like spinach, collards, kale, broccoli. All of them are very, very good. And studies have shown that people who eat several servings of those every day actually 11 times younger in their mind over a period of time, which in fact 11 years younger over 30-year studies. So it's actually quite important. And then, if people are drinking, to minimize it, not more than a glass a day. And then the type of alcohol you drink also matters, because red wine, because of the dark grapes, is actually good for you as long as you do not exceed a glass a day on average. Because if you did that, more alcohol is never good for anything.
Right.
And white wines tend to have higher acetaldehyde, so they're not as good. and if you're eating grains, have the whole grains, older grains like quinoas and sourdoughs and things like that, which have more prebiotics. So I think that's sort of the gist of what is the mind diet. And then, of course, sugar was a big one where reducing your sugar content, studies done in different places as far off Malaysia, Vietnam, as well as in Western countries, in the US, and then in China, show that literally for every 60 grams of sugar, people's performance in mental tests and mathematics dropped. Sugar is, again, a big thing because if you look at ancient human beings, the only sugar we had was honey, right? And that was only about 5% of our total calorific content of. So the key percentages of our total calories we're actually consuming too much sugar as a proportion. So I think that proportionality matters. So I would say, so that's one example of biohacking where you literally can make a big difference, improve your mental health, improve your performance just by altering your diet.
I'm glad you mentioned the blueberries because that's a significant part of my personal diet. I read the studies about their connection to better cognition years ago, and so I've always since then tried to incorporate them regularly in my daily routine.
Very good. One thing I mentioned was, of course, among the olive oil, all that, of all the things, I think as human beings, it's not normal for us to actually drink a lot of oil. So none of the other oils particularly, but olive oil on its own not only has anti-inflammatory properties, but it's actually particularly good. So if you're doing any cooking, any drizzling, it's actually a little bit of a myth. Yes, it does not have a high temperature point, so it's not so good for frying. But even when you do cook with high temperatures with it, it doesn't actually produce the trans fats as some of the other ones do. So actually, that's the only one I probably didn't mention. The Mayan diet was olive oil. So I think that would be and the other thing would be literally from being intentional about our mental health performance as well, right? Because I think, for example, what I was astounded in my practice is that when studies have done where you look at people who are optimistic and people who are fundamentally pessimistic, right? Even skin biopsies. I mean, that's the thing that really amazed me. Like, you cut a piece of skin and a wound is healing up, or you've taken a biopsy. The skin biopsies heal slower in those who are pessimistic. So I guess even there is a mnemonic given in the book on how you try and optimize yourself towards becoming an optimist, because it may not necessarily be natural for everybody. You don't just get up and say, yes, great, I'm an optimist, right? Maybe you have to be intentional. And there's certain steps there. And the first one would be visualizing, your success or the best you. The second thing is being intentional about things, including your interactions with people, particularly thanking somebody for something. Just say a specific thing. Look, I'm really happy to be on your show because I can talk about my book and, that kind of stuff, rather than just simply not paying attention to people. And I think the importance of gratitude, because we all have things in our lives we can be grateful for, in spite of when we are in strife or misfortune, and we tend to forget that. And the next one would be an optimism orbit. It's important for us to try and hang out with people who make us feel better and be positive. And the next one is understanding the reasons. So like if you're in an exam or you're playing sport or you're just a stressed individual in certain situations, the thing to remember is you're not the only one. So, there are plenty of people going through that at any given point in time. So the important thing is to try and rationalize it, to say, yes, there are other guys hitting it. If they're going to get through it, I'm going to be fine. It's that kind of stuff. And the last one is reinforcement, like, making sure if you're somebody who gets into a low mood, watch things which make you laugh, which are funny. And I think so for all these things, there are actionable steps. And one other thing is importance of either meditation or journaling or something like that. And I was speaking to a neurologist the other day, and if you use all your senses, you may have heard of this, it actually improves the success rate. So for example, if you said that I'm going to write this book or whatever, if you actually wrote that thought down on a paper and you looked at it and you put it away, apparently it helps more than if you just thought about it. So which is quite amazing, which I was only aware of recently. And so I just think all these things, there are lots of stuff we can do to improve our daily lives and our performance.
I totally agree about the mindset, the gratitude. Some of the research about just being grateful for things and expressing gratitude or journaling about gratitude are pretty profound, what you can accomplish in that. And we could really go into as far as your mind and the belief that you have in your ability to heal. We could talk about the nocebo effect and the placebo effect and how those are influenced by what you think is going to be your outcome based on what you're doing. These are all fascinating parts of science that we don't know really a lot about, but we know that there are outcomes affected by what you think and how you feel.
Yeah, I remember my previous book I wrote about the Ted Kaptchuk study at Harvard where they looked at the nocebo study. I mean, that was incredible. Like they looked at pain syndromes and they looked at people on acupuncture versus, medications. And it was crazy, like on the nocebo, if people felt they were taking the real thing when they were getting a dummy thing, they got better. Conversely, if people were actually taking a real medication which supposedly are the chemicals to help you, but they didn't get better if they didn't believe in it.
Mm-hmm.
So, I guess that's, how we can say, the power of faith and the power of our mind helps. And there is a genetic tendency. We do know that some people are fundamentally more I guess from the gene type, we can actually test and tell who is more likely to respond to a nocebo, I suppose. And these people probably also are the ones who more likely to respond to, faith healing. But the reality is this is in our tendency. So it is some things which is actually known.
I think that in the next decade or so, we probably will see more shift towards personalized medicine that will involve genes, like you are mentioning in your practice. You look to see if they're going to respond well to a medication. I think that kind of thing will probably expand more, where we'll look at this medication will work, or even this dietary supplement will work, and we'll know a lot more based on people's genetic profiles and make things a lot more personalized.
Yeah, you're right. Like one of the things in my lab we do is like the supplements, and what you mentioned is really important because for each of us, sometimes we are more prone to not absorbing something well or absorbing something better. So we can actually tailor it. We can
Mm-hmm.
actually test your genes, particularly choose what kind of supplements may be beneficial for you. And of course, diets as well. And even exercise types. Like, we can actually see what type of exercise actually benefits you more than others. And that's the sort of stuff
Mm-hmm.
I do in my lab. But to answer your question, the reason for personalized medicine coming to the fore is we can't really afford the cost of the medicine on an illness model
Mm-hmm.
anymore as well. And it made worse with COVID because of, most of the health systems took a hammering or there were lockdowns and various things where the capacity issues. But I think if you think about it, in the US, I think studies have shown that 90% of your overall healthcare cost in your life was in the last 1 to 2 years of your life. And in other countries, probably 2 to 3. And that is crazy. Like, all these years you live and then you're spending all this at the end of your life. So I think this is more like taking a little bit of investment in your own health and being proactive. And I think it's coming, that awareness. It's a bit slow only because obviously there's always more money in illness, right? So there's more
Right.
ads and then obviously more companies invested in the illness end simply because the moment you're ill, you're going to actually end up spending a lot more. And I do find it surprising, like, my lab organizes gene tests and maybe, I don't know, $500 or something like that. But the reality is people may sometimes think, wow, it's 500, I don't want to spend it. But literally you get one illness or you get one procedure, that budget's blown anyway, right? So I think it is so important, like what you're advocating as well, is for people to literally be proactive and of course use science so that you can actually do things more often.
We began kind of talking about how there's a difference between lifespan and health span. Health span is really putting more, I'll just say simply putting more life into your years, right? You're going to live healthier for longer, and that should be the goal of all of us. We don't want to just live longer. We want to live healthier for longer. You've mentioned some of the ways that what you eat and even what you consume beyond what you're actually eating, but the things you're consuming as far as media and television and reading and things, that those can potentially affect your genes. What about environmental factors and psychological stress, how do they influence our genetic blueprint, and what strategies mitigate those negative effects they might have?
I think psychological stress are definitely partly because obviously when you're stressed about something, you end up with secreting more cortisol, which, is a steroid. So it's a immunosuppressant. So obviously your immune system gets suppressed. And, if you think about human beings, and like I said, all our genes from evolution biology point of view evolved over time. So there were the anxiety gene or the scaredy cat genes did help us, right? Obviously, because if you think about it from a more practical point of view, you always had people who were braver than others, right? And so if you're living in the cave and the world was much more dangerous, there were animals roaming everywhere and things like that. If you're a saber-toothed tiger or something, if you're a bravest guy and you're like, I'm going to go get him, guess what? Most of you didn't come back, right? So it's the scaredy cat survived more. So we do know that more of us carry the anxiety gene because over primitive human beings, there was also a survival gene because you are like, I'll actually just stay in the cave and see how that guy goes before I go out, right? And you ended up living a bit longer. So we always carry that. But just like what you said with the nocebo effect, the power of the mind and our genes, even though we inherit the genes, we can modify them. That's why I said that it's really, really important to be intentional and try and make. So it's the same kind of thing we've got to say. Okay, just like you do physical training, you go to the gym, you've got to say, okay, I am anxious, so I'm going to take some steps towards improving my mind. And, you can be intentional about it. And I think, so that's a really big part. And I think you can't stress maybe about 30% of a lot of response we see. If we said 50% is genes, maybe a 30% of it, you can actually have a psychological thing. We know that pain syndromes, for example, right? If you look at depression and pain syndromes, and a lot of it is in the mind. Yes, you may have a family predisposition to having a low mood or depression, but on the other hand, there is a reason why the same medications are often used for pain, used for depression as well. It's because of the fact that it's the same kind of a chemical imbalance. And like what we said earlier, if you're in acute stress, initially you secrete adrenaline, which is your fight or flight response. Then a few hours later, you have your noradrenaline, or in America, you say epinephrine or norepinephrine, because it's stopping your blood from, bleeding out. But then after that, it's the cortisol, so that it's suppressing your immune system a bit, just so that you're not getting too many other things happening in your body. But what it does is over time, if you have a chronic response of cortisol, it's actually bad for you. In short bursts, it's actually good for you. And that's why sport and exercise and things like that, where you have little adrenaline, things actually good for you, because in short bursts, stress is actually good. But the problem is if it becomes chronic, and then it's no good for you, because over time it's just going to drag you down.
For sure. Stress plays such a significant role in our life, and it is something that we definitely need to be aware of and take the time to mitigate it as much as we can. What are some of the cutting edge advancements in genetic research that are making biohacking more accessible to the general public?
I think it's more awareness of existing medications or even supplements. Like, for example, I mentioned folic acid earlier, and we do know that if you think about life on earth, we have carbon-based life, right? And when you have carbon-based life, then you're producing carbon dioxide and water, which we excrete to our systems. But the building blocks for one carbon metabolism, where you're getting the carbon donated, is through your folate metabolism. So folic acid is a big building block. But what we know that is actually, for example, at the moment, the studies are more certain in women than in men, but we certainly know that, folic acid supplements do actually reduce hypermethylation, like you mentioned methylation earlier. And essentially, folate is a methyl donor. It can be a methyl donor, it can be a methylene donor, it can be a formal donor. So fundamentally, using that one carbon metabolism, it optimizes. So what you find is, we can test our genes now to get your chronological age, right? So you may be 50, but your biological age may be different. And what we know from testing our genes, that folic acid supplements putting in women, actually we know reduce aging. The other thing, as a society, we don't have enough of is enough vitamin D.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really a big part of it, partly because now we're getting more technological, living inside. It was not how we evolved. So every time I talk about people talking about, let's go live on Mars and let's download our brains and things like that, that's fine, but it wasn't meant for us, because as a skin doctor, even if you fly in an airplane, we know that pilots have twice the risk of melanoma, for example, right? We're not even meant to fly. So, like, what I mean is our bodies weren't equipped for it. So we have to be a bit more sensible. And the other things is, like we spoke about sugar earlier, and because of this, we know that medications like metformin, for example, well-known cheap diabetic medication, reduces your sugar in lower dose. We know also increases your lifespan. The other cutting edge where people are getting into is, like what I said, is these mTOR inhibitors, which is actually interesting history of rapamycin. It was from Easter Island, and fundamentally a Canadian scientific group looked at like the indigenous people there before they put an airstrip. And they were going to put in an airstrip where they were going to get more people coming and going. And they thought, hey, this is a chance to study an island before, and this island is otherwise called Rapa Nui or Easter Island. They thought, let's
Mm-hmm.
study human beings and the environment there before we put the airstrip, so we'll know how modernization affects these people. And then in the soil, they found a fungus, and from there they extracted this rapamycin. But with it, the pharmaceuticals and everyone got so interested that gone were the studies. They never followed up. Unfortunately, they never did the second part of the study to see how those people are now. But a lot of people are using those medications because, like I said earlier, in lesser creatures, like if you look at from worms to almost in all those creatures, it has shown to increase lifespan. So most people are good enough for me, I'll get started. But what I'm seeing in following up on that is there are quite a lot of side effects. There's
Mm-hmm.
still quite a lot of other things. So the reality is the jury is still out. Some guys are going even more to the extreme where you're actually trying to use CRISPR and things where you're actually, splicing bits of your DNA. I just think that's too dangerous simply because I just don't think our genes are not as individualized as they are. So it just has a potential for too many things to go wrong. It's mainly because all our genes don't do one thing. People talk to me about peptides and genes, like even when we're talking about cancers and things, right? It's not as straightforward because all tumors don't just express one gene or one
Mm-hmm.
peptide. And that's where the problem is. Like I said earlier, the longer you live, the more tumors you develop. But the longer we live, more things are going wrong because there are more things being expressed. And it's not as straightforward as one thing does one thing. And I guess that's the problem, is our thinking is still very simplistic. We think, yes, I'll just cut it off and put it in there. But the truth is, a large part of our DNA, we still don't know what it does. Like, we know a large part, and there's a large part of it we always think are inert and they're just not active. But actually, it's just we don't know.
Yeah, and I think that you're talking about side effects of drugs that may have an association with longevity. Emerging research is showing that there are natural solutions that can actually roll back our biological age. I have some colleagues that performed a study on some lavender essential oil-based products that they had significant rollbacks in biological age, particularly in their brain age, by using these lavender-based products. And certainly those are going to have fewer side effects, if any at all. It's been a well-studied essential oil for many years, and I hope that we can continue to look at those types of natural solutions that are helping us to have that health span and roll back our biological age.
Yeah, absolutely. Lavender, we were speaking, mushrooms,
Mm-hmm.
increasingly, like I mentioned, olive oil before. A lot of these things, been there around for such a long time for a reason, but we're only now sort of rediscovering it.
How can somebody who wants to start a journey in genetic biohacking get into it, and what should they keep in mind as they start making changes?
The first thing is, to get started, literally, is to, do your research and think about what is it that you want to achieve, or what are your goals and what do you want to do, just so that you're a little more intentional about it. Things like my book, Biohacking Eugene, certainly do help in point you in the right direction. You can even go an audio or a gene test if you want to, and that gives you a baseline, but it's purely for wellness. Like, we don't test for illness, so it's purely about diet and lifestyle. On the other hand, what people need to do is write down a plan of, because you sort of know roughly your family history, you roughly know the areas you may be targeting more. Like in my case, I mentioned like my father has dementia, so of all the diets, the one thing which I was first looking at was the Mayan diet. But in addition to that, you may be an athlete and your thing is just optimizing your performance. So like I mentioned in the book, the importance of vitamin D along with probiotics, for example, actually improves your athletic explosive performance. So there are lots of things like that people can do. But I think the first thing I would say is take more interest in your body like you would in your car or something like that. You know what I mean? Like we tend to always say, if a car is not serviced, if a car is not repaired or something like that, we straight away take it, but we don't do the same with our bodies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. The more we can become aware of our bodies, how they work, what's beneficial for them, and particularly dial that in personally, like you've mentioned, we have the science now where you can do a nutrigenomics analysis. You can do these gene analysis that can tell you whether you process proteins well or carbohydrates, even caffeine, how fast you metabolism or how slow your caffeine metabolism is, and what exercise is good for you. So there are all these tools available to us in modern day that can help us to get this health span and to reverse that biological age and live a much healthier life for longer. So I appreciate you being on, Dr. Paul, and for what you've shared and for your books and having this information available to the masses. Thank you so much for being on.
Thank you for having me. And also, keep up your good work as well.
Thank you for sharing your time with us today. I hope you've gained insights to elevate your health and life. For more transformative evidence-based wisdom, I invite you to explore my 20-plus books at authorscott.com/shop. Don't miss out on the chance to supercharge your health and guide others to a better life. Like, share, and subscribe to join the movement transforming lives. Here's to your journey toward boundless health and happiness.